Testing? Yeah, this one's on. I've got the Pentagon one. You've got the State Department one.
This one's more conventional. Yeah, that's the State Department one that didn't have a slide up on switch. It was more complicated. Thanks, Nick. Some really great lessons and suggestions for people. And is that okay? I was going to say on the sweet potato. I thought they were very clever when I was visiting the program in northern Mozambique, and everything was awash in orange. The shirts, the cars, the people, the kiosk with the orange flesh sweet potatoes were growing, and there's Pam Anderson and Jen Lowe, and kind of a brilliant strategy for that. And as a journalist, that at least got my attention. I said, "Wow, this is really clever." So gave one something to write about. Yeah, I think if you would examine Nick and I closely, particularly our forehead region, you would see the years of banging our heads against the wall on these issues. And clever slogans and things really matter. On the Free Mandela one, and you're right, I was based in South Africa during the last gasp years of apartheid. And there were all sorts of slogans, and the Free Mandela one really then became very popular and a chant that everybody could rally around. But at one rally that I was at, and there was a group of people chanting Free Mandela, and I observed some young man walk up to them, and they were chanting Free Mandela, and he said, "I'll have one of those." And they said, "One of what?" And he said, "I'll have one of those Free Mandelas." And so, but as Nick said, that's your entry point in. They could basically sit and explain to this guy, "No, here's what this is about," right? And so educate him through that way. We'll take questions, and delighted to have all those. I was just going to ask Nick one thing. You were talking about kind of mentioned social networking and aid workers out there perhaps with a flip camera and what they can do. I think you've also been very effective in employing that yourself. So you go on to trips, and you're kind of a multimedia person. You're not just there with a notebook and a pen, but you have the videos, you have the blogs, you have the following you on Twitter and the Facebook accounts. How effective has that been, and what kind of following are you finding through that?
What's interesting is that video in particular is really emerging as a way to tell the stories, and it tends to reach a different audience than than the New York Times op-ed page. In general, the videos tend to be watched by a lot of young people, and they're very much about going viral. That they spread word to mouth, or word on Facebook, for example. It's very important to be fun, playful, non-didactic, and they can those are kids, those are young people who by and large don't read the column, don't pay any attention to the printed word, as far as I can tell. But they, that's a huge and important audience, and that is something that I think actually a lot of people in the field could really do. And it's hard to predict who's going to be good at doing them, and if there's too much oversight, I'm afraid that they're going to end up being really didactic and boring. But you get some sort of playful kid with a camera, it's something will go viral, and then you'll reach audiences you can never have imagined.
Right, and the whole video aspect, I think, is the new way of telling stories. And really, I really like a lot of the videos that you have, because there's the written word, but then you can actually see it. We'll start here in the front, and then we'll move around. And so if we keep the questions succinct, and then we'll be able to move through many more.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Oh, sorry. It was very important what you said today. And I was part of that discussion with Mark Cohen yesterday on the human face. But I want to take that a step further and say, what about a locality face? I think in many ways what you've done is to identify a place where it's happening. And if you think about the way in which America has influenced thinking, it's New York, it's L.A., not Los Angeles, L.A. And I come from Australia, and there's a bit of that about Australia too. When I was president of RUNS, International Nutrition Sciences, we worked with the International Science Council to make science more locality related. it's happening. There's a Scientists for Health and Wellbeing initiative. And I think that's an opportunity to multiply the effect by recruiting localities that work, places where there's a success story on which we can build and which we can multiply. What do you think about that? I think you're doing it.
It's an interesting question. I tend to be skeptical about the ability to, I tend to think that we connect, about individuals, and that if it's a place, especially one that is far away, then we tend to tune it out unless it is something that has some pre-existing connection to us. In the case of Darfur or Eastern Congo, for example, I always, in my earlier reporting, I always avoided ever putting Darfur or Sudan or Congo in a headline for fear that the moment I did so, readers who are on their way to work, they've got to be at work in half an hour. Sudan's a long way away. They will just tune it out immediately. And while if I can, in that lead, if I can have some individual, some story, often if you give people, I found that if you describe a choice that somebody has, kind of a Sophie's choice kind of a situation, then people will wonder, well, what would I do in that situation, or what did that person do? And so you can kind of drag them in, and then if in the fourth or fifth paragraph you describe the place, that then they'll pay attention. And over time, these places build their own constituency. South Africa was an example of a place that built its own constituency. Darfur is one that developed one. To some degree, Eastern Congo has one. Africa as a whole, to some degree, is beginning to get that. Afghanistan. But in general, I think that focusing on that human face is probably going to work better than a geographic face.
David?
How do you do? I've never actually met you before, but we've spoken a lot. My name is David Nabarro, and I just wanted to share with you my understanding of the particular power of your work. It's not so much that you're an advocate, it's more that you're trusted. And so when you wrote about Darfur, when we were first in contact, and then on some of the other issues on which I've been working over the years, it was that people believed you, or believe you, I should use the present tense, because they don't think you're trying to market anything. They think you're probably one of the most trustworthy people around. I'm a bit nervous in a way now, because I think you're a bit like Roger. You've become an advocate yourself, and so there's a chance that your credibility with the people who we depend on to release money and to take political positions may have reduced if they also understand what an advocate you've become. So my question
Don't tell
is...
them.
Sorry?
Don't tell them.
No, well, that's what I was going to say. How can you sustain the disguise that is so important? And will the new book actually mean that you've come out as an activist and reduce your potency, for example, with number 10 Downing Street, where I know it's very strong, or with the Élysée Palace, or some of these other key places where you are capable of unlocking things that have hitherto been a bit closed? And particular thanks for your work on sexual violence in conflict, which has been really, really important in the last few months.
Thank you. I mean, it's a very important question, and I think that to some degree, the humanitarian world has gotten into trouble because it has oversold things and made things sound too easy. And in truth, helping people is a lot harder than it looks. And I think it's. I'm very interested in the original anti-slavery campaign, the abolition campaign, when it started in Britain in the 1780s, because that's really one of the best examples of a social movement that had an extraordinary impact. And there they were very, very careful not to oversell. And in fact, if you look back at their estimates, if anything, they were quite conservative. And as a result, I think they had more traction among people who were sort of in the middle of the road. I think that's the environmental movement, on the other hand, sometimes tended to scare off or lose people in the middle because there was a sense they were overreaching, and probably true of the humanitarian movement as well. In my case, I worry about this question that I'm perceived as as an advocate or as a crusader. People periodically will come up to me and say, "Oh, I love your crusade," and I always flinch at that because to me, a crusader is somebody who essentially has sort of lost some of that objectivity. I think that one of the things we tried to do in Half the Sky in particular, where we were worried about that, was really periodically look at cases where advocates were exaggerating. And, for example, there's nothing I believe in more than girls' education as a way of bringing about change. But in truth, the research on this area is incredibly shoddy. Most of it was done by the World Bank, by people who believe passionately in girls' education, and it's all about correlations rather than causation. And there are a million reasons why educated girls would have much better outcomes than uneducated girls, because they live in cities, they marry educated men, there are a million things going on that aren't necessarily causative. And I think likewise, for example, in maternal mortality, another cause dear to my heart, that the advocates sometimes exaggerated, made the argument that it's cost effective. And, at the end of the day, saving lives through maternal mortality is fairly expensive. Vaccinations are cheap. Maternal mortality is expensive. And so I think so that's one way I've been trying to sort of push back, by acknowledging some of these complexities or unpleasant truths, and just keep my secret, okay?
Well, I think it's also what Nick has done is by not really specializing in these things, but going back to these stories, that also improves or enhances the integrity, the trustworthiness of those issues. And I guess that's what I've tried to do, and my focus then even more narrow, particularly on the hunger issue, but still trying to maintain the journalistic balance that needs to go down or needs to happen. And it's a fine walk that one has, but I think it's also good, and David was mentioning this last night, to kind of use your expertise and what you've seen in the field to really enlighten particular issues, as opposed to, I think, what a lot of foreign correspondents do and journalists do. We just move from story to story, and it's rare that we kind of settle down or burrow deeply into a story. Let's go over here. We'll go to the far side. Pam.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Anderson from the International Potato Center. Great lessons and warnings. Thank you so much. My question is about the social media. Those of us that are in that transitional generation that remembers typing our master's degrees on typewriters are struggling to figure out how to use the social media. And I'm curious about, do we understand what makes something go viral? Do the same lessons from social psychology that you applied to the print media, are those also what's happening with the social media? And can you give us any hints on, one of my colleagues said what we need to do is spread crumbs through cyberspace. What would those crumbs look like? Do you have any tips for us on how to sort of plant or engage with social media?
One of the problems with social media is the way they're now done on Twitter or Facebook, for example, is that essentially one's preaching to the choir. And it's a new and fairly efficient mechanism to do that, but you're largely already spreading the word to people who already care about those issues. I think that that is why I emphasize video and the possibility of going viral as the way to break through. And I don't think we really have a clear understanding of there's no necessary and sufficient conditions for them to go viral. Clearly, humor helps. Celebrity sometimes helps. A very just a playful approach sometimes works. A song helps, music, but humor in particular. People will watch videos because they think they're funny, you know, and I don't know how we make a funny potato video, but there must be clever ways to do that. But I mean, there can be a video that is funny and yet has some serious content to it, and that then links people to a website or tells them what they can do. Or, I mean, one time in writing about iodine, I sort of made I'd always wanted to do an iodine story because it just seemed like such an effective intervention, and yet it truly is just about the most boring thing one could ever write a column about. And so I sort of searched for a couple of years about how to do this, and finally I just decided, okay, I'm just gonna, make kind of a joke about it. And so I forget exactly how I approached it, but it was something to the effect that, okay, this is, the most boring intervention around, and it's sponsored by the most boring country around, Canada. And so here you have the combination of the most boring country and the most boring intervention, but boy, it works. And because there was an element of the humor there, people kind of read through it. Well, if it was just a straightforward thing that, gotta iodize that salt, my mother wouldn't have read it.
The Canadians are bristling. One of the most famous stories in the Wall Street Journal once started with the lead, this is a story on the 7th largest steel mill in the world. Go ahead and read it anyway, right? So you had to go to paragraph 2, right? Yep, you, and then Howdy. So.
Thank you. My name is Marcella van den Kommer. I'm a marketing and communication consultant. Thank you for a great speech and the lessons and warnings you give. I'd like to respond to the warning already somebody else gave this morning about the negative connotation about bio and biofortification, because I wonder whether that's an American thing. For example, in Europe, everything bio is great. It's organic, it's natural, it's healthy, even though it's not healthy, not necessarily. People think it's great. So I just want to, be careful before we do biofortification down the drain as a word, that it may be very country-specific or culture-specific.
That's interesting. I just don't know. I mean, we were joking earlier that the thing to do to allay concerns about these issues would be to start issuing press releases denying that biofortified crops improve virility.
See, you guys on selenium should have used that, right? Is that just... I just learned about selenium this morning, so I don't... Howdy.
Well, my first point is that Canada just gave Harvest Plus a check for $27 million. So it's a very interesting and lovely country, and thank you very much. But the other point I wanted to make was, okay, trying to get people's attention is hard. If you do get their attention, often your intervention can solve the problem if you get the resources within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You can have a big impact. Agriculture takes 25 years to fully realize the benefit, and it's 2% every year. It's like we all know that giving a child an education, sending them to graduate school, starting with kindergarten, is a very powerful thing to do. With us, people aren't sure that that is going to be powerful after 25 years. So it's kind of like we're here at this conference, and we've just finished the 5th grade, and we got straight A's, and we're trying to say, look, we got straight A's, we got straight A's. But the skeptics who don't know where we want to be in 20 years and aren't convinced we're going to get there, they're still skeptical. So how do you create excitement where you're really going to make your major contribution 20 years from now? So I think we have a special kind of problem with that.
That's definitely true. I think that part of the answer is to get individuals not only engage as a constituency, vaguely supporting things in a kind of amorphous way, but directly engaged particularly. I mean, in the case of malaria, the reason, in a sense, you have a growing community that supports malaria as an issue is that you also created, you sliced and diced individual aid, so you get high school students going out and raising money for bed nets and doing car washes for bed nets. I wonder if in agriculture, and if you look at microfinance, for example, which is another thing that, has had a somewhat uneven record and works in some places, doesn't work so well in other places, but you've had people who were very engaged in microfinance, partly because they can go to kiva.org and they can plug in $50 and lend to people around the world. I wonder if through globalgiving.org one could allow people to sponsor various inputs, new seeds, for example, for 1 acre of land in Uganda for X amount of money per year, and then it would be somehow allocated to that particular area. They'd see a picture of the farmer, but even if the amounts of money aren't significant, that person who would do that would feel that they are a part of something larger. And I think that, as with microfinance, there is a feeling that agriculture, one of the strengths of agriculture as an intervention, is there's a feeling that you're helping people help themselves. And at a time when there is something of a backlash against a certain amount of humanitarian assistance, agriculture, that is a strength of agriculture and agriculture aid. So I wonder if there might be mechanisms through that kind of sponsorship approach to build a broader constituency for agriculture.
Let's do one more question back. No, right there. You've been holding your arm up with your hand, so I know it's been up for a while.
Ricardo Wawi. I'd like to ask you, how do you strike a balance between self-serving and the message to serve others? For example, biofortification could be to help feed the world, but also could be to help improve your nutrition for now and for later.
I think that one tries all messages and sees what resonates with a particular audience, with a particular constituency, and there'll be multiple messages that will all convey and have traction in different communities, and self-serving sometimes can be very useful.
And then we'll have one final one here.
Jack Winkler from London. Within 5 years or thereabouts, the first biofortified products promising substantial health benefits will become available to American consumers. It's going to be a salad oil fortified with omega-3 fatty acids, DHA in particular. It also promises benefits on another of your interests, which is to say it's important for pregnant women and their children. How would you, as a journalist, play the arrival of such a product as a possible way of introducing biofortification issues in the third world, where it makes an even bigger difference?
I'm sure any marketing team would come up with better ideas, but I do think that, given the fact that we in journalism, this larger problem that we tend to not to cover things unless they happen on a particular day, then one of the things that I think is always useful is to make sure that they do happen on a particular day, even in a sense when they, when they're happening more slowly than to pick one day. So, have make sure that something is announced on a particular day, or make sure that something is, and then use that as an occasion to talk about it, to create buzz. When the oil is actually introduced in stores, there's another occasion. Likewise with sweet potatoes or beans, whatever else, that try to use the occasion when, pick some date when it is being introduced more broadly, and try to use that date to create, so that there is news that people can actually cover, that something happened yesterday, and that, it's not going to be a silver bullet, but it may be an excuse for some organizations to cover something because it did happen on a particular day.
So Nick, thanks a lot. This was great and really heartwarming, I think, for both of us to see the interest in not only in your work, but in journalism and in general, and telling the story and the whole idea of crafting a narrative and getting the word out. Because we've devoted our lifetimes to doing that, so that there's such a great interest in what our role can be is really heartening. I think Nick, you're going to be around for part of the day, and so break time, lunchtime, Nick will have a book signing. Other questions that you have, please assault him with those. Right? How's that?
Thanks very much. More power
Thank
to
you. Right.